And welcome to another episode of Inside the Mind of the Blerd. We are having another interview today. My name is Scuba Steve, and I am joined by my co-host today, Double O. And we will be interviewing the creator, CEO, writer, Chris Hill of Rapture Burgers. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Chris.
Yeah. Yeah, my name's Chris Hill. I am the writer, self-publisher, creator of Rapture Burgers. It's an original graphic novel or manga series about a high school student who is destined to conquer the world. We say it's a little bit like Pinky and the Brain if Pinky were in charge.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I like that. I was thinking like, man, this sounds like a crazy story. If Pinky's in charge for world domination, it's gonna be
Yeah, and that's how it starts very simply as like this high school kid who got broken up with um, and starts to hear voices, as you do. Sort of wakes up and is like, I know, I'm going to conquer the world. But how do you do that? So it's like baby steps to maybe I got to conquer the school science fair, or you know, like try to maybe I'm trying to infiltrate a company that I think is secretly trying to compete with me in world domination. And so it sort of becomes a sprawling kind of epic across this like post-apocalyptic world of Camille felling its way upwards and like leaving a trail of destruction behind him as he does it.
Mhm.
Um, we just say like this kind of goes places instead of just being like, and every episode he fails and nothing happens, and we're all fine with that.
Fair enough. So the character Camille, how did you come up with that idea for like kind of like a Pinky taking over the
Uh,
world type character?
Man, this goes way back. Like, so I graduated high school in like 2004, so it's been a minute. But
It's
like
all
right
good.
after high school, I had this girlfriend that I dated through the end of high school, a little bit after, and somehow there became this running joke that I was going to conquer the world because I
Mhm.
was one of those like sort of depressed, angry, not very friendly teenagers.
Mhm.
But I sort of started to open up when we started dating, and my opening up became sort of like maniacal megalomania, I guess, where I was like, I'll show the world. So that just turned into a running gag. And so my friend from high school, Adam, who is a co-writer on all of Rapture Burgers, he and I started to talk about like we want to make a web comic. Like, this was a peak of web comics. Man, the video game cats type of thing, and Penny
Mhm.
Arcade was obviously big, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff too that was just huge at the time. And like Mega Tokyo was also like in print, and Scott Pilgrim was also big at the time.
Okay.
But anyway, we were like, we want to make a web comic, and what will it be about? And I was like, oh, we got this joke that I'm going to conquer the world, so why don't we like spin that off? Except I don't want the main character to look anything like me at all,
Mhm.
and a little bit in the Sydney character looks almost exactly like my friend Adam and has maintained that look basically throughout the entire process. But we started to write for a web comic, and it was like four panels evolved into individual pages, and we got really good at writing like punchlines at the end of individual pages. And so we wrote that, and then one of my siblings was like aspiring to be an artist, so we had them start to draw up character designs and stuff, and do try to do little mini comics and gags. And it didn't really take off for a long time, but the core concepts came from me. Like Camille, sometimes when we're writing Camille, like when Adam especially writes him, I'm like, you're just writing me from high school. Like you're not even trying. Like I recognize that. Uh, but it's also it evolved a lot more into, well, okay, Camille wants to conquer the world, but I don't want this to be like Pinky and the Brain episodic, nothing happens. So how do I make that into something? And so we started to talk about like, well, what world does he live in? Like what thematic elements can we add into the world, but also how can we give him a world where it's possible for him to ascend to power? And so you're like, okay, a post-apocalypse. And I'm sort of a sci-fi nerd, and I read a lot of like classic sci-fi novels like Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke for a while there. And so I really like the idea of space elevators and how do I integrate that into the story. But as we built the world up, there was an acknowledgement that I'm making a story about a character who's a little bit based on me, but just a little bit, and has become like escalated into this crazy person who we're like, we want him to be able to conquer the world. But there's an acknowledgement that like he couldn't be black, because if you saw a black character start to do that, immediately our minds would go to, nah. An outlandish black kid like suddenly standing up threatening the world. Nah, that's not what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
So I leaned more into like, all right, he's got to be different. He's got to be that kid where everybody says he's harmless. Nobody thinks that he's capable of doing anything, and they just brush off all of the crazy shit that he like tries to do or talks about doing, because they're like, he's harmless.
Yeah, it shows you what they can get away with, kind of.
Yeah, and obviously, like, our social situation just continued to play into it, and even the idea of like a bumbling idiot who has no place being in power, somehow getting into power. I was like, oh man, I wasn't trying to make this about like real life politics, but look what happened.
But look, it makes sense. Yeah, and it definitely makes sense.
So it became more relevant over the years, because I was like, this was a Bush administration era thing that I came up with. This is not, Trump wasn't even in my mind at the time,
and look how it came back full circle.
Yeah, almost feels bad like to see that happen, where you're like, man, now people are going to think it's about that. And that's not at all what it was about.
Hey, I know those type of things, because like you telling the story and you're like, this is where I was going with it, and then a real life situation happens that's kind of similar, and you're like, oh god. But
Yeah,
it's
now
like,
it's going to seem like a commentary, and I'm like, you know what? It was a commentary on the whole concept to start with, and the fact that real life proved the point isn't. I can't help that. That was always the case.
yeah. It was always something, but now it's kind of shining a light on it now with saying everything that's going on in the world today. Yeah, I understand. Double O, did you want to get a question in before I jump to another one?
You can go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, Camille is, in a sense, anti-hero villain from that perspective. So, since we're kind of touching on that for a second before we go to our next like big question, who are some of your favorite villains, anti-heroes in fiction? Doesn't have to necessarily be anime, manga. It could just be in fiction in general.
Yeah, that's good question. He's a little bit modeled after, well, not actually at all modeled. Like, if you remember Excel Saga, that a little bit of commonality of like a wacky sci-fi comedy about somebody trying to conquer the world. But like Il Palazzo, and that was more, I'm going to sit on my throne and send you off to do my bidding. But Excel, if you count her as like a villain anti-hero who's trying to do his bidding, like I was a big fan of Excel, way back when, where I was like, she's sort of fun. And obviously like the Brain from Pinky and the Brain is up there. There were great episodes of that where like Pinky actually got all the world leaders together and like we're about to hand Brain the key to world domination, and then he messes it all up.
Yeah.
And other various fun sort of schemes. Yeah, I mean, I watched a lot of Bleach too, and Aizen was a good villain, even though he's one of those smug guys, like, it's all according to my plans.
Yeah.
And
everything was made by this. I created this.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's like there's a lot of those villains who are villains because they're so smart and they're so scheming and they plan so far in advance. And I'm like, yeah, that ain't Camille. You did not plan anything in advance. I like those villains, but they become very menacing and very scary because you're like, oh, you don't even know what he had planned. You don't even know like what the next thing is.
Mhm.
And they're good examples of like what I'm trying not to do, because it's like you have to acknowledge that if you want some people to follow this character, even if he's trying to do something bad, you want him to be sort of sympathetic and sort of funny to watch at least.
Fair.
And in that way, I'm like, I'm a big Simpsons fan, so Homer at times is basically a villain, where he's
Fair.
you're like, why am I cheering for this guy who is like a total idiot, but at the end of the day, he has heart, and you know he loves his family. Um,
Okay.
Man, yeah, I'm thinking too hard about it, because I'm like, I like Gundam, so Char is like a great, like
Char's
Char from
definitely a
Gundam is
villain.
like up there in terms of villain who has justifiable reason for what he's doing and becomes like a protagonist for a little while, but then goes back to like, I guess I'm just gonna murder everybody.
Mhm.
And
So,
that's one of those cases where it's like Gundam has a lot of gray area villains, a lot of gray area politics, where they're like, not to say like both sides or anything, but it likes to depict that like the colonies, for example, were fighting for independence from the Earth government, who were like ruling them from afar and stuff like that, and that there are bad factions within both groups who are like, let's commit mass murder because that's to reach our end goal. So
mhm.
yeah, Char for sure is probably my top. Like that's the guy that I go to. Of like, yeah, I
Yeah,
understand you.
I like that. And then like they're always they have good intentions in some way, and then they just go over the edge
Yeah,
to
it's good
it.
intention spiraled into the wrong execution.
Hmm. Yeah, we I like that because I know, even though I guess it's not good intentions, but it is a light Yagami. It's like I want to get rid of all the bad people, and then all of a
Yeah,
sudden
yeah.
it's like you're trying to get in the way of me getting in killing bad people, so I'm gonna kill you too. And then that's when it just starts going
Right.
crazy. So
It's a
yeah.
slippery slope of like, and I think that's something like if you look at Star Wars, where it's at least the original trilogy,
Mm,
obviously it's like fairy tale-ish sci-fi fantasy, and it's about black and white, evil versus good, resistance is gonna like win. But it didn't, until later, it didn't really introduce like that idea of like gray area, or you could reform people who were on the empire side or anything like that. um and if you have like puppy kicking villains who are like, we explode entire planets and kill entire populations just because, then you're like, well, you can't justify that, you can't sympathize with that.
Dio
But
Brando.
but like, there's a lot of Japanese media that wants to give you that perspective of like Attack on Titan, for example. Like, we're talking about anti-heroes, like Eren is like a villain by the end of it. You're like, oh, so you want like genocide. Like, you're not even joking.
I like
You want genocide.
another one I like is Walter White. Walter White started off, I need to get this money for my family. I got
Right.
cancer, and then it just it dove into like a spiral of I'm the kingpin, and even though I have enough money for everybody to be secure, I just don't want to give up my throne now. And it was just like, okay, so,
Yeah. And that's a comparison where it's like, we have more of these stories now about, this is a person who started with good intentions, or at least what they believed to be good intentions,
mhm,
and you're watching their world spiral into darkness and then become the villain of the story. But because you watched them from the beginning, and because you understood their circumstances at the start, you still follow them and are maybe a little sympathetic to the cause. And sometimes it's hard to get people to acknowledge, like, BoJack Horseman, the point is that BoJack is the bad guy. Like, he
yeah,
is not a good person.
Yeah.
he's not a
Oh
good
yeah.
person at all.
And
And
you're watching him spiral out of control and abuse the people around him and hurt everybody.
mhm,
And and like, same with Rick and Morty. Like, you're not supposed to want to be Rick. You're not supposed to want to be. You're not supposed to want to be like BoJack. You're like
yeah,
supposed to understand and like watch. But
you just
that's sort
find
of
yourself rooting for them because they're the protagonist. So it's
right.
like,
And I think it's good that media challenges people that way, to say like, we're going to show you a perspective that maybe you wouldn't believe in yourself and you wouldn't follow, but we're trying to make the point that this is wrong and that we're not excusing or saying that they're doing the right thing. And yeah, so like even going back to Attack on Titan, I still find that very interesting because I was like, oh wow, no, he went like full on villain. His friends have to unite to stop him, villain.
Even one movie that I feel like I knew that they were wrong and I knew that they were doing bad things the entire movie, but for some reason I found myself like, "Ooh, are they going to get away?" And it was the Pain and Gain with Mark Wahlberg and The Rock, and they basically they like kidnap a dude, and they're like literally trying to get him to sign over all his money, but it's supposed to be like a comedy in a sense. So you're like rooting for him, and then at the end you're like, oh, they're about to go to jail because and you're like, oh, they're gonna get away and stuff like that. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm rooting for these dudes that literally kidnapped the dude and made him sign over like all his money and all this stuff. And I was kind of rooting for him. And I was like, it's crazy how they do that and they tell the story from that perspective.
Yeah, it's like yeah, because you know we have the trope of like the hero's journey, where it's like you know, this nobody comes from nothing and like has to face his destiny and become the person who saves the world, and they have to accept their calling. But for me, like especially with Rapture Burgers, it's like, yeah, what if the chosen one was like the dude who was like, you know, no, I'm gonna conquer the world, like that's my destiny, that's the thing that I'm gonna do. And I'm going to go through the hero's journey of like being saved by forces beyond my control, being guided by forces that I don't understand to become the villain. That's sort of the story.
Yeah, The Boys and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's another one where it's like, wow. But Danny?
So a question that I had was, so when you're talking about Camille, you talk about so Camille's because he can't conventionally like rise to power, you know, the way a regular whatever you want to call him, an antagonist, a villain, or just someone that's trying to find their way. But I love and locked onto the word failing forward.
yeah.
Can you talk more about what that means?
Yeah, failing upwards is kind of a fun idea because again, if you go back to Pinky and the Brain, like at the end of every episode they fail. They're foiled by something. And so their progress is reset. But what if like you failed, but somehow it still progressed you forward? And you know, for example, you get kidnapped, which is a setback, but somehow through being kidnapped, you accidentally burn down the entire place and get saved by somebody who is putting you in a better position, giving you a better option for like reaching your goal. So it's like, despite Camille's failures and idiocy, somehow he continues to progress forward towards his goal. And it goes back to that sort of destiny thing, because heroes do this where they're like, you know, we're down to the wire, the hero's about to lose, and then suddenly the act of God or the friend comes in and swoops in and saves them, and we count that as a victory. And so they progress forward and they became stronger, more powerful, or the secret transformation that they didn't know they had happens. And you know, in a way that is failing upwards, where they didn't, like, the main character didn't do anything to like win necessarily. They just, we call it an ass pull sometimes in media. Like, oh cool, yeah, and you know, he just had like his mother's sword or whatever hidden and it's super overpowered. So I mean, and less magical, less if you remove the magic and the superpowers and stuff, which is something that I wanted to do with Rapture Burgers, where I was like, yeah, okay, sure, I could make it a supervillain where there's like superpowers and he gets like falls into a vat of acid and somehow becomes like a crazy strong person or whatever. But what if instead it is that idea of like, it is destined to happen. And sort of like if you do time travel movies where somebody goes back in time and tries to change something, it is destined to happen and they can't stop it from happening.
Oh yeah.
And but it is also fun to just have like this is the main character who gets punched in the face sometimes. and just
Mhm.
sort of fails because he's not very good at it. It's like getting to have your cake and eat it too, where you're like, but I want the fun shenanigans of it all goes up in a terrible flame, and he has to like accept that he failed, but then also, but actually things are moving in his favor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. It reminds me of Megamind. How
Oh yeah, yeah.
Megamind, he's just like he's tried so hard, but it's like it just keeps failing. But so you said that you've been working on this story for quite some time. Would you say 2004?
4 or 5, yeah.
4 or 5? Okay, so how has that journey been? Because that's 18 years, almost 20 years now. So how has
Yeah.
that journey been as far as like the struggle of like, man, is this going to work out? This, and that, and keep pushing forward, even though, you know what I'm saying, you feel like it's not taking off, or you just believing in yourself that it is going to take off and everything like that. So how has that overall journey been?
Yeah, so it did start right after high school or so, and I go that far back because um a little bit of the seed for the story that became all of Rapture Burgers was like this text document that I wrote on my desktop way back then. I just like wrote the ending of a story because I felt like I have the ending of a story and it's a tragic ending, and I know that these two characters are involved, but I have no idea how the story starts, what the middle is, how we get there. I just know how it ends.
Hmm.
And
Mm.
so that sat around for a long time. And then we had our idea for the web comic and all that. And we spent like a couple years very slowly getting artwork for that, but it never really came to fruition. And then I think I just like kicked the idea around for a few years before ultimately, like, we did submit to publishers some of the art that like my sibling drew. It got rejected, of course. So we had a few years where we were like, we're trying to prepare for publishers, can you finish those 2 chapters we asked you to finish like 3 years ago? And but while that was happening, I started to think more and more about like what is the actual story to this. And so that ending that I had written down, I started to form into like, okay, well, what if this is Rapture Burgers? What if this is like starts with this story of this alternate universe version of me trying to take over the world, and it evolves into this big, big, big story. And so I started to write text documents, which is like backstory of the world, like the setting, the world building, the history of characters that I was coming up with. And, I'm originally from Oklahoma. I had moved to Texas, and with a couple of friends, I was starting to like throw the ideas around, just like brainstorming in their living room with some friends, like, what if this? What if that? And it's that sort of thing where you're a little young and your friends are like, ooh, what if I appeared as a cat girl? Or one of your friends is like, oh, what if I have like one of those bags of holding where I can pull a giant hammer out? And I was like, nah, that's not the story I'm trying to tell. And
Yeah,
so,
that's
I pitched that around, kicked around. We maybe got updated art in that time frame. And then in 2012, I moved out to California. And within a year, I had found on Craigslist, actually, this small indie comics event that only happened once, that was like speed dating for an artist. So the artists were sitting at tables, and the writers would come through with their ideas, look at the portfolio, and then maybe you agree on something. And
mm,
I met the original artist for Rapture Burgers, like the graphic novel that I actually published and released in like 2012 or 2013. And their name is Mimi Alves. And the funny thing about that is our manga assistant, Mimi, her name is actually Camille, like the main character, but she goes
mm.
by Mimi, which is the
Nice.
name of the previous artist for Rapture Burgers. So it's very confusing.
So when y'all have a conversation, you got to be very direct, or at least
Yeah.
like,
Well, and in fact, I call her Cammy because I'm like, nah, I'm not, I'm not dealing with that confusion. Um, but Mimi Alves was our the artist that we paired up with, and for about 6 years, like we were like cranking it out, like working hard. Like got 2 volumes physically printed. I got ISBN numbers. I exhibited at it used to be Kamikaze in LA, but now it's LA Comic Con. I exhibited a few years there. I was shucking books, and part of the learning process of doing a convention for me was that our first day was horrible because we just like laid out a stack of books on the table and sat in our chairs, and we're like, "You want it?
Come
You
to
want
us.
it?" And no, people don't respond to that. There's too much stuff going on. So we quickly figured out, like on the second day, I think maybe with some advice from one of the other exhibitors, is that we stopped sitting down, we stood up, and I started to carnival bark at people like, "Hey, do you like world domination? Do you like Pinky and the Brain?" And I would draw people's attention. And then as soon as they walked over, we would shove a book in their hand. And like they start to flip through it. And that was the only way we sold books. Like we, started to do pretty decently. And then, in the background, we just continued to work on like the second volume and revisions for the first volume if they were needed. And we cranked out a second volume and also exhibited that and sold some of them at Kamikaze. And I also did Long Beach Comic Con, but they're a little less friendly to indie comics, I think. They have a little more of that like mainstream big two feel to them. So anyway, after that, we continued to work on like our third volume, and we did finish it. But around that time, Mimi, the artist for the original version, was doing animation work and started to get a little busier. And we were working on the fourth volume. We got like, I don't know, 50 pages into it, and they had to go off and like do other stuff. But by then, it was probably 2015, 16, or 17, somewhere in there. I had contacted an animation studio, like an American animation studio, to say, "Hey, what I really want is to make this into an animated series. And, I've got some bonus money, or I've got some leftover money from like selling the house that I had. I want to make this into a pilot." And actually what I reached out to them for was like a music video or an opening sequence, like a minute and a half. That's it.
Nice.
Yeah.
And we got to talking, and the sort of director and CEO of that animation company, he responded to it, and he was like, well, let's try to make it like a 5-minute short. And I was like, okay, well, let's try. I'll write something up. And we did some work on it, and we started trying to find people we could pitch it to. We started going to like events in West Hollywood. We went to Cannes Film Festival. We really started to try to push it around and like meet people and get it made. But at some point, the decision was made like, but we should just make this into a full-on pilot. And of course, I'm paying out of pocket for all of this. And, we sort of came to an agreement where it was like, it is not the top priority. It won't get done quickly. But if we do it consistently over time, then, hopefully it'll get done. And so we got an animatic for a pilot made, and we got segments of it fully animated. And we like got we got one sort of notable voice actor on it, whose name I don't think I can technically say because he would get in trouble with his agent. But
understandable.
Rhymes with Ani Umbosh. Nah.
Ani Young
Not quite. So we did go to the talent agencies, and we pitched to one of the talent agencies to say like, hey, if you could put somebody on it and put some smaller people on it, that would be great. But there's a lot of conflicting interest with some of these guys where they're like, yeah, I'm actually trying to get into event planning, and it sort of spirals out of control where like, they have their hands in a lot of different things, and so they get distracted by those things. And so I became like very low priority, and we weren't making traction. And I also wasn't super happy with where the pilot went, because the sort of working together, getting the guidance about what should be featured in the pilot, what aspects of the whole concept, because sometimes people get consumed by, this is a big story. There's a lot of stuff involved in this. There's like the sort of futuristic cyberpunk. There's like wasteland. There's romance. There's some action mixed in there. There's some like wacky time multiverse shenanigans mixed in there. I'm like, yeah. But like, let's focus on the core concept here.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, like the pilot became a little bit of a mess because there was just too much stuff trying to be crammed into it,
Mm.
and I wasn't super happy with the way the writing went. And so we just sort of fizzled out eventually on that, and I then connected up with Brendan Hay, who is a producer. He's like one of the co-creators and executive producers of that Gremlins animated show. He also did Harvey
Nice.
Street Kids and The Croods for Netflix, and he's a super nice, super good guy. And a couple years ago, because all that animation stuff led up to like 3 years ago, when I started to go like, yeah, I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I want to find a different route in to try to pitch this. And so Brendan and I connected, and we actually did get in and pitch it to Warner Brothers into two different divisions, and we were set up to pitch to DreamWorks, and we were trying to get into Cartoon Network, but we also developed some other concepts besides Rapture Burgers because I'm like, well, I sort of understand that this is in a little like young adult or like anime type of range, but I also have like concepts for a children's show or other young adult shows. One of them, let me just throw this one at you: um, giant robots on the moon playing football that are like piloted mechs.
Wow. Okay.
And it's
That's
like
interesting.
that's elevator pitch. And I was like,
Mm.
we fleshed it out a bit and like got some key art made for it, but we never got around to pitching it to anybody.
Mm.
Um, but we also came up with a pitch with art and everything and a pilot script for like a family comedy. So I spent a lot of time doing things besides Rapture Burgers as well. But then I decided, like, you know what? I want to go back to comics, but I want to do it the way that I always wanted to do it, which is as manga. Like, with the level of detail and this kind of storytelling and using some of the tropes that we expect, that's what I really want to do. And it also allows me to completely rewrite the whole thing because, when you write something when you're like 19, if you could go
Yeah.
back and
Yeah.
change
Oh
it,
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I already know. You don't even have to explain.
And like the story definitely grew beyond the way I was originally writing it because we weren't willing to commit to telling a serious story throughout the entire first volume of the original graphic novel. So it seemed like it wasn't going anywhere. The entire first volume of the original was just about like dealing with Camille's breakup and coming to terms with it. And yeah, he was trying to conquer the world, but it was more of that episodic, nothing's going to happen.
Mm.
And we had a fan come to us at a convention and look over to her friend and say, "Oh yeah, this is a comic where it seemed like nothing was going to happen, and then it totally does." And I was like, "Yeah, that's my bad." And, I can say that it was a little bit planned that we were trying to catch you off guard,
Mm.
and it's still a little bit true that the goal is we want to bring you in with comedy and lightheartedness, and then evolve into a more serious story and have you invested in the character, interested in what's going to happen. And yeah, like there is an anchor to Camille's relationship with Rose, who broke up with him, and like how does he come to terms with that? Like, there's a little bit of will they, won't they? And that was one of the things that especially the animation director latched on to, is like, but we need that like romance aspect, or we need that like very relatable, just got broken up with aspect. And I'm like, yeah, I get that, but you also understand that if I focus too much on it, it loses the point of the rest of it, or it becomes like, so he's getting revenge against his ex-girlfriend. Isn't that like, we can't condone that.
Yeah.
uh, so anyway, this all culminated into what I decided I want to do as a manga. I started to reach out to I started to look around. I found this site called Skillots, which is specifically for foreigners finding Japanese creative people to make things. And on there, I found Pepper, and I found some other folks too. Like I found somebody who's very good at mechanical designs. I had like 3 or 4 different people do test pages of like, do this in manga style. And some of them didn't understand the assignment. They thought I wanted another American looking comic, so they did their best to make it look like American. I was
Mhm.
like, nah, that's not what I'm
That's
asking.
not what I'm asking. Yeah.
And so Pepper understood it and drew Camille and Alex. Alex is like our second main character, who I don't. Again, it gets complicated, so I try to focus on Camille. But anyway, she
Mhm.
drew. They drew both of those characters in that style, and I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And over like 2 years or so, we started to make a pipeline and work together and redesign characters, work on backgrounds, get things translated because Pepper doesn't speak that much English.
Mhm.
Um, and Also, a little bit of me is starting to understand what the manga pipeline looks like versus American comics pipeline, because
Okay.
it's surprisingly different.
Hmm. How so?
And
Go ahead and explain. I'd like to
yeah,
know.
so American comics, especially if you're working on the big two or any of like the traditional way we do them, normally it goes you have a penciler and then like an inker and then maybe a colorist and maybe a special effects person on top of that. And they're all separate people unless you're like a really indie comics person who does everything. And manga is done, they have the assistance concept. And in fact, I had offered Pepper like, "Oh, I could find somebody to do inking for you." Like, no, 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 absolutely
Mhm.
not. Like, why would I trust somebody that I haven't trained and doesn't understand my style to like ink over my sketches and stuff?
Mhm.
So our process became a very rough, you could call it like thumbnail, but very, very rough sketch, and then a cleanup sketch. And these two are to give me a lot of time to say, that's not working, that angle doesn't work, or we should add more panels. And then Pepper goes in and does the inking. But an assistant might be able to be trained to do that, but it'll take a long time to get an assistant up to speed on that. But then there's like the background phase as well, which a lot of backgrounds are pushed off on assistants. And then there's like the shading, which could be the black toning, and
Mhm.
then there's the actual like screen toning of everything that goes on top of it. But there's a focus on making everything sort of unified to look like it was the same artist, to look like it's Pepper's like strokes that are finishing the characters.
Mhm.
And there's also like a difference in American comics are more like a frame from a movie is how it's described,
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
still scene from a movie. But manga is supposed to convey more motion and more action happening than is actually drawn. So like the sound effects in manga are like, Japanese has a lot of onomatopoeia that just don't make sense to me. Like they make sense, but like how am I supposed to know that staring at somebody makes the sound G? Like it doesn't make a
Yeah.
but this is all stuff that gets conveyed on the page, and you start to realize like, oh, you can communicate a lot of things from a single panel. And like, yeah, it is drawn more of, we're thinking about deformation of like a character in motion, like punching. And so there's a lot of little details that I'm like, I appreciate this more. And also, man, it takes so long. It takes a long time.
It takes a long time. I do
And
understand
so
that.
this is why you have like teams of like, oh, we have 5 assistants. What do they do? Well, one of them is on background duty. One of them is on like cleaning up the characters or drawing props. One of them is just like screen toning or inking. And it's less like, I think of American comics as like a production line where it moves down the line, the next person works on it. But
Mhm.
manga is a little more of like a collectivist. People contribute parts to it, but you want it to look completely unified, like the single artist did it. And I think the
Okay.
way they credit people is similar, because like on the front of a book like One Punch Man, there's only one name for the artist.
Yeah. Yusuke Murata.
Yeah, and then you go in and you're like, not even pencilers or inkers, it's, oh, I want to say thanks to my 5 assistants, and I don't even tell you what they did. They just worked on it.
Yeah. It's so crazy how they do that. But I mean, I guess that comes with the business of like, you know what I'm saying, where people feel like, oh yeah, I'm the big name, and then you guys helped, and you guys are going to get here to my level, but
Right.
you know,
And it's
it'll
more of an
happen over time.
apprenticeship in Japan, where it's like, you are being trained to do the things that the main artist is doing. You're being trained to be able to do them, so you can go off and be the main artist yourself.
Hmm. Yeah.
And assistants are also sort of part-time, where they might be helping 5 different artists, and they
Mhm.
just need them for like 3 days that month, and so they get paid a daily rate for that. It's a very interesting system. It worked for Japanese media. They crank out a lot of manga, so I can't
Facts.
say they're wrong or anything. It works.
This is true.
I had a question for you. So, I said I'm here taking notes. um, so one of the things that was really interesting to me is about people's different takes on marketing.
Mhm.
For yourself, what would you say was the most important part of marketing? Both, and I mean this both in like when it comes to promotion, social media wise, or how were you touched upon when you were at a con. And it's one of those things where you also kind of have to feel certain things out if it's the first time you ever did them, because like you said, sometimes getting a table at a con, you're just like, that's step one. All right, I'm gonna sit here.
Yeah.
Let's see if people stop by my table. So what part of marketing do you believe for yourself is like something for yourself that was very important and that people should probably put a little more focus on?
I think it's just being flexible and adjustable, because I to be honest, like, marketing is my least favorite part of anything. Like, I can make something, I can just go make it, but you have to realize that if you just dump something out on the internet, nobody will notice it. Like,
Mhm.
there's just too much stuff competing for attention, and I think probably the most important part of marketing, you realize, is that there's a personal touch. People are more likely to buy something from you if they get to know something about you, if they learn about you, they see you, you talk to them. Because part of the con thing, it wasn't that I would yell out to people and they would immediately buy the book, because they wouldn't. It was
Right.
that I would talk to them, and like as they're flipping through, like react to if they were laughing at something, or try to feel out like which pitch is working better for them. But there's also the question sometimes at conventions about like, how much do I charge for this? And like everybody has a different answer that's right for them, and ultimately it is like, you want to make back your cost. But like,
Right.
marketing can cost money. Like, if you have to pay for online ads, with and if you're paying for online ads, I'm like, do some clever ad copy, people will respond more to that. But you want to make back the cost of what you put into it, ideally.
Mhm.
And so that might, to me, that, when you're like, I got to charge $30 a book for this,
Mhm.
but do people feel like it's worth it? Like, do you have the confidence in your product to really push it for that much money? And I think having confidence in your product is probably the number one thing about marketing that was hard for me. And I am more of the kind of person who doesn't want to bother people. I don't want to harass anybody to like
Mhm.
buy something, because I'm like, I feel like I'm burning my relationship if I'm like, buy my thing, buy my thing. I need you
Right.
to do this. Um, so it feels like there's an aspect of being personable, um, and being like nice and relatable, and getting people to like, you know what, I'm going to support you. I like you. Um, and it's just hard to find the balance of that, I think. Social media is also can be very impersonal, because you're just blasting stuff out into the ether and
Yeah.
hoping that people latch onto it. And if you're not like hot take every other day, that's a little hard to like.
Yeah.
People don't want reasonable opinions, and like, you're just plain commentary. So I still struggle with marketing. I do best in person, when I can talk to people and like tell a funny story, or hand them a book and have them look through it, or just have them see who I am, and that I'm not like a machine, like saying, I need you to buy this, I need you to buy this. Um, so yeah, probably just the personal aspect. That's all I can really say.
Okay. So speaking about being a machine, what is the work area setup for Chris to just thrive?
Oh, here we go.
Uh,
Like
yeah,
how do you set yourself up?
so I work in tech. So right now with the pandemic, I've been working from home. And
Mhm.
my work setup before, because I wasn't really working from home, I was just playing video games, and then writing when I had the inspiration to write. Which, that's actually a very big part of it. Is For me, I can't force myself to write. But I can read my own mood and the sort of waves of like, I need to capitalize on this right now. I feel like writing. I have a great idea. I was in the shower and I was having some shower thoughts, or I was driving and I was having the sort of like, I'm on autopilot. I'm having vacant thoughts, and so I get a lot of inspiration there. And then I'm like, I got to type this up. I got to type this up. And sometimes that's like laying in bed on my phone, cranking in some text. But like my actual setup for my desk used to be just like, oh, I had an Amazon desk that was like had a little stand for my monitor, but then I got 3 monitors, so I put that on an arm, and the 3 monitor setup. And because I'm a gamer, I have like a gaming PC that I built.
Okay.
But with the pandemic, I was like, I added a whole table to the side that was just like, here's my microphone, here's my joysticks, here's my VR headset. And it became too cluttered because they weren't actually connected. So I actually went during the pandemic to like a place that sold old office desks and supplies, and got one of those like legit corner desk things that you would see in an office
Oh,
building.
L bracket, like an L shape.
Yeah, with like heavy duty metal filing cabinets on either side of it, and like a lot of space underneath. And so then I got like one of those keyboard trays that like can lift and go under. So I went way more professional like after the pandemic, where I was like, I'm here all the time. I work from this desk. I write from this desk. Like I supervise the art. So now I have a much better setup, and I got one of those secret lab chairs too, because sitting in a cheap IKEA chair for 8 hours a day is very uncomfortable.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you see, I got a whole couch.
Yeah.
I added to my man cave.
Yeah, I definitely had to do some upgrades on the work area with the pandemic, because I just like when I would go to work, I could go walk around, I could just get up and do stuff. But when I was like, well, I can't go anywhere because of the pandemic, and I could go to the living room, I guess, and work. That's exciting. Go to another part of the house and work. But yeah, and especially for me, like if I'm really trying to focus on writing or something like that, it's good that I now have a separate office that is just isolated. I can close the door, I can close the blinds, I can do whatever I need to do. I can just focus on writing for however long I need to.
Enough. Okay. So the question that's been on my mind since before I even got on here, and I was like, now I should ask it probably in the middle of the interview. Rap, Rapture Burgers. How did you come up with the name Rapture Rapture
Oh
Burgers?
yeah, so naming things is hard.
Mhm.
So way back when we were coming up with this, we were like, what do we call this? We were like, mad mutually assured destruction. Nah, that's terrible. uh and there's like Scott Pilgrim was big. We were really into it, and we were like, well, we can't do Camille versus the world. That's too on
Yeah.
the nose. And it was actually unnamed for a long time. We just didn't have a good name for it. But as I fleshed out the backstory of the world, um again, I grew up in Oklahoma, and Oklahoma is in the Bible Belt. It's very religious.
Yeah.
I had a kind of a joke about in case of rapture, like those bumper stickers, in case of rapture, this car will be unmanned.
Hmm.
I had a little bit of a joke that was like, in case of rapture, this car will turn into a mobile burger joint or something like that.
Okay.
The implication, like, no, I'll still be here.
I'll still be here. Okay.
But that's not why we named it Rapture Burgers. That was like just a separate thing. What actually turned out to be was, as I was fleshing out the world and the backstory, we were saying it's set in a post-apocalypse, but what caused the apocalypse that basically ended the world? And it's common trope in sci-fi to have like a mega corporation.
Right.
Like Blade Runner has a mega corporation. Yeah, so branching off from that, we were like, Rapture Corporation. How about that?
Mm.
Because it has that ominous sound to it. Rapture Corporation. Who would call their company like Rapture? And
Mhm.
so we started to build that up into it's a mega corporation that's like a combination of Walmart and let's say Raytheon or one of those
Mhm.
like military defense contractors where they have their hands in everything. And what we wanted to do was have this sort of ominous mega corporation looming over everything as you start to like as a world gets built out as like Rapture Corporation Mall, their fast food chain, which is called Rapture Burgers, of course,
Mhm.
because Rapture
Mhm.
Corporation came down to Rapture Burgers. And then as we wrote the story, it was also that there's a part of the story where Camille ends up working for Rapture Burgers, and it's kind of almost a pivotal moment
Mhm.
where he starts to suspect the Rapture Corporation, the owner of the Rapture Burgers franchise, is actually trying to conquer the world, and they're my competition.
And
And
you
that's a
work
little
for
bit
the
what
company.
actually sets off the main plot.
Okay.
And so we were like, yeah, I mean, Rapture Burgers is a catchy name. It's a strange name that
Hmm.
people remember a lot of the time.
Big facts.
Um, but it also now that we're doing it as a manga feeds into a little bit of the like, why is it called Bleach? Tell me that.
Yeah, that man, that is a fact because I still don't understand that.
Yeah, but we had a little bit more as we got into it, a little more connective tissue of there's this Rapture Corporation looming over everything. Camille ends up working for their subsidiary Rapture Burgers again, which is an ominous sounding name and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And it launches off this whole quest eventually that Camille goes on.
Okay, okay, yeah. I was like, as soon as I saw it, I was like, all right. So when you sent me the link or whatever to the stream, I mean to the StreamYard, to the Kickstarter, and I got on the Kickstarter and I was like, okay, this looks really dope. And then I was looking at the art and everything like that, and I was like, Rapture Burgers. I was like, huh. I was like, why? I was like, why? I was really trying to wonder why. And then I read the preview of the 30, and I was like, dang, that didn't explain it. That didn't explain it yet. So I need to ask him. That's going to be one of the main questions that
Yeah,
I'm going to
there's
ask.
a quick glimpse in the preview of the city being blown up. There is a Rapture Burgers with like a burger and stuff on it,
Mhm.
but that still doesn't explain to you why is there a place called Rapture Burgers? Like, why does that exist?
Yeah.
But
So
yeah,
that was pretty much what it was. I was like, okay, I definitely got to ask. How did he come up with this name and everything like that? Because, like you said, naming things, poof, it can be tough. It can really be
yeah,
tough.
and this was well before the habit of like light novels that get adapted in anime series doing long names. Like that time I got reincarnated as a slime, or you know,
Yeah. Mm.
those super long names where you're like, really? That's the name of this show?
The long name. I got reincarnated. I died and I got reincarnated as an Aristocat. I was like, what? Like, what? What is this? Another one is science. Science made me fall in love. Oh, I fell in love and I
Yeah,
used science to prove it or something like that. And I'm like, what
yeah.
the hell?
There's a lot
Like,
of those, like and some of them make sense. Like, it's not my fault. I'm not popular. All right, sure, that's fine.
yeah, that makes sense.
But
But
we've part of pitching trying to get it picked up as an animated show is also acknowledging like if we had to, of course we would change the name, like if it came down to it, if
mhm.
that was like, all right, we'll pick it up as an animated show, but we got to change the name. Like we can't allude to Rapture, which has a religious allusion to it.
Uh-huh.
And to be fair, Adam in particular went to a Christian university and knows a surprising amount. And so there is some like non-blasphemous like references and understanding of Christianity mixed in there
Mhm.
um, for thematic elements and stuff like that.
Okay.
Like some of the towns are named in a way that if you know the deep cuts, you'll recognize. There's a little bit of stuff that like of course we want to put parts of ourselves or parts of our experience in the story in the world
Mhm.
even if it's just a little nod to us and people who think like us.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense because I know you put a few elements of your own thinking into the story, so that's something that just happened naturally.
Yeah,
Oh,
and I didn't put any of the art of the original up there because this really is a totally separate thing. But
Mhm.
we did have conversations about the races of the main characters because and in some cases when you ask somebody to design a character just from scratch, depending on their leaning, their preference, it
Mhm.
just the default in America is like, oh, a white character, depending on who's drawing the characters.
Yeah.
And we had a little bit of that in the original where it was like, just design the character, or he's based on this guy.
Mhm.
But this time around, we did think more about what makes the most sense and who do we want to represent in a way that is like meaningful. Because sure, we could be forced, because it was asked, like, could you make Camille black?
Mhm.
And so I had to give them the real answer of like, nah, that's
Mhm.
not, that doesn't make sense from a story point of view. That doesn't make sense from a social point of view to me. That's not the story that I'm trying to tell.
Mhm.
I'm trying to make a point here, and this is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah.
And but it was sort of like, okay, well, what about like Rose? What about Devlin? What about Sydney? What about Alex? Like all these other characters, and think about. And it's not like somebody said justify your choice on their race,
Mhm.
but if you have the chance to redo it and looking back and saying like, to be fair, they just defaulted to white for this reason or whatever. It was too late to change it by the time we got to it.
Mhm.
Um, so we definitely wanted more representation this time around, where it wasn't like our whole entire main cast is just white people.
Yeah. So yeah, get some representation in there, and then I mean, what I'm saying, representation for what you wanted to do and what you were trying to drive home without hindering your story and things like that, which is the main thing.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people get caught up in the idea that like it was mandated or it's forced diversity, but it's like you realize that I'm a black person writing a story, and that like maybe my default image of a character is not white, and that
Mhm.
I want, like, I want to have a good reason for why would I default to white for this character? Why would I default to that? And
Mhm.
so anyway, we talked about it before we started this version of it, and um, as we were redesigning characters, there's this outstanding question that comes up a lot on Twitter recently about why aren't there more black characters in Japanese media? And like, they know black people exist. Why don't
Mhm.
they put them in their media? And it's sort of a complicated and unfortunate answer that, it's just like, yes, there are black people in Japan. Yes, they know
Mhm.
we exist, but culturally speaking, we don't have an influence there. And if you talk to some of the artists and like authors in Japan, they think about the Japanese audience first.
Mhm.
And that's all they care about, because like a prime example is like conventions, right?
Mhm.
Conventions are a big place where fans show up. San Diego Comic Con, at its peak, I think it had maybe 130,000 people show up.
Mhm.
In Japan, one of their big conventions, 750,000 people show up.
Sheesh.
So in a way, it's like saying they don't really need our money, but it's also understanding that like when it's brought to America, when it's brought to the West, it's done by the publishing company after the fact. Like
Mhm.
there are only a few things. Like Funimation is now actually getting into helping produce some of these shows. Like
Mhm.
Fire Force was co-produced by Funimation, and Fire Force has a surprising number of black characters in it.
Yep.
It's just great.
Mhm.
But it's a little bit to say that like until they're making something for the international audience, like with us in mind, there's a low chance that they'll bother,
Mhm.
because their number one priority is like Japanese nerds who are fickle and can be kind of assholes sometimes about things. And there's, talking with the Japanese people that I work with, it's just sort of like a complicated, like, there's not an easy answer. We would love it if they would give us more representation,
Mhm.
but they don't listen to people from the outside a lot of the time, these artists, and just trying to get that an influence all the way back up the chain to where they're like, understand you have a lot of fans who are black
Mhm.
and who are non because the characters aren't white technically. They just have
Yeah.
pale skin or they have see-through skin on the page.
Yeah.
And at one point, I was told, like, yeah, but if you don't put a screen tone on their skin, anybody can imagine themselves as that character. I was like,
No, that's not how that works.
that's not how that works.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of lack of understanding, a little bit of like willful ignorance, and it's a slow progress. There's more representation now than there was in the 90s, and hopefully it continues to increase. But
more representation and better representation.
Yeah, and better representation. They don't look like caricatures,
Yeah, Mr. Popo.
But some of this goes back to, and this is just like whole bunch of social issues, but like the American media that got fed to Japan, like what media do you think got exported? It was like our biggest movies with all of our white stars. So like the default image of America is blonde haired, blue eyed, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it's sort of a complicated answer that there's no easy solution to. And for me, working directly with the Japanese artist, I can influence that. I can say, I want this main character to be black. I want Rose to be black. And that started a whole conversation about like, how do you make a black character cute? How do you like depict different aspects of, like, you could call them racial identifiers or something like that. And like, wait, do all black people have like big wiry hair? And if you come at it as like, that's racist, it's like they don't understand. You have to explain, you have to be patient. And so we got to a good point where we were able to show, like, design characters like Rose and Devlin, and there's a character named Jack, and do it in a way where it didn't look offensive. And it was a learning process.
Yeah, it's understandable, and it's good that y'all are even like being patient and going through the ups and downs and the woes of that. You know what I'm saying, with your artists and just figuring it all out. I love the representation that you have in this book, that what I'm saying, where that you do have in it. And then I love the fact that, like how you said, you were like, well, if this person is going to be mischievous and taking over the world domination, it would have been nipped in the bud per se for a black character, whereas a white character, you see all the things that they can get away with. And I was all like, I like that, like,
and it's like, not only do I not want people to be like, yeah, that would never happen, but it's also like, if you're doing sort of a villain anti-hero, you're like, I don't want people to look up to him, and I don't want this to be the representation that we get of like a black main character where people are like, I want to be like Camille. Like, nah, don't be like Camille. The point is to not be like Camille.
Yeah. So I like that. So you're in you at the Pacific time zone. So you're in California. What part of California are you in?
Yeah, I'm in LA.
Oh, okay. So you're in the big part. You're in the nice part. How often do you go to comic conventions, things like that? How often are you slated for a table at a convention and everything like that? How is that journey?
Yeah, so because I haven't had a product to sell in a little while, we actually tried to get a table down in Dallas at Acon, which is happening in a few weeks, but unfortunately, like, after the pandemic and stuff, they had more applicants than expected, so we didn't get a table. Okay. I would like to go to LA Comic-Con again, but a lot of this comes down to, like, I don't mind paying the $300 or whatever for a table, but do I have a product to sell, or am I just there to market? So I a little bit have to figure out like what my plan going forward is, because I had actually timed this Kickstarter in hopes of being able to go exhibit at a convention while it was going. Because like I said, I'm much better in person at like, sell you this. I want to get you to do something. So lately, I've attended a few of them. Like, I'll attend AX sometimes, Anime Expo here in LA. I'll attend LA Comic-Con and go look around. But going forward, probably LA Comic-Con will be the number one like convention that I try to exhibit at. Just because, like, it's here in LA. I still have to pay $30 for parking, but I don't have to get a hotel. Yeah. And they're starting to draw like 100 some odd thousand people now, so it's big.
I'm sure. I was about to say LA. Yeah, because you just mentioned Dallas, and that's where I'm located. So when you
Oh
were
yeah,
saying that, I was like, oh shoot, if you were in Dallas, I would have definitely tried to
yeah.
show up. And,
Acon is like they said in 2019 they drew like 38,000 people. So like going in, I was like, it'll be smaller, but it'll be good to get back into the habit of like, let's go exhibit at a convention and set up our table.
hmm
But yeah, it's unfortunate that I won't be able to make it there this time. But LA Comic Con is happening, I think, in December now instead of October. So
hmm
I have a lot of time to prepare for that, and hopefully I'll be able to go.
Hey
Um,
man,
but
long
yeah,
as you.
like lately, my main goal is like I want to get this book made so I can put it in people's hands. Like
Yep.
my my first accomplishment is get it finished, and then
Mm,
I will try to sell the hell out of it as hard as I can.
yep.
And
That's it.
yeah, you know, sort of to that end, that's what this Kickstarter is for, is to like accelerate us and give us a good deadline and like a good reserve funds to do all this. Because now that we have Mimi on as an assistant, we're doing things like pre-rendering backgrounds in 3D that can be drawn over or redrawn,
Mm,
um, and you know, doing props like there's a space elevator again, there's vehicles, there's like hard props that are things that take a lot of time to draw as backgrounds, and so we're
facts.
trying to optimize our workflow a lot by doing this. And so the Kickstarter is really about that, is getting us some pre-orders, giving us some extra funds to really crank it up.
Mm,
Because my hope is that within a year we'll like have the rest of this volume finished, which is about 300 pages, and then I'll be able to get it printed and all that stuff, and like be able to have it in hand.
man, so yeah, a volume for 300 pages. That's a lot, man. So you really cranked it out, and that's really dope that you put that much effort and that much work, and it's getting built and presented for everybody to see and everything like that, as in a hard copy. So that's actually
Yeah,
really
I feel like now we finally had enough to show, because we have like 126 pages in various states of completion.
mm,
And I felt like we have enough that is like detailed and toned and like done that I can show, and it's like visually impressive stuff. It's
hmm
not just like characters talking. It's like, I mean, you know, it's a little gratuitous to throw like a robot fight in there, but like it's a little bit of an art flex to show off like this is what you can expect. This
yeah,
is the sort of quality that we're aiming for.
yeah. That's what's so dope about your Kickstarter, and because I've seen other Kickstarters where it's kind of just like, hey, this is what we got, and they just kind of leave it, they just kind of leave it like that. Where you put so much detail into making sure that you fleshing out and showing people what they can look forward to, and even you even gave us a 30 page sample and everything like that, and it's just like it's really dope. And then you gave us like the color panels. It's a lot of stuff that you did on your Kickstarter that gave some individuality that other people don't have. Um, so I really liked your Kickstarter a lot, just even looking at it and exploring it and stuff
I
like that.
appreciate it. We're
Mhm.
we spent a lot of time in advance, like because I was going to launch this Kickstarter like 3 months ago, but then I was like, I want more to show. Like, I don't feel like we have enough to show for what we've been doing. And I want like a special splash art just for this that gives you a little bit of an idea. Like, because we talked about how do you communicate the premise and an image,
Mhm.
which is hard to do. Like, we looked at like Blue Exorcist, and I'm like, it doesn't explain the premise, but it tells me like it's a battle shonen because there are kids with weapons and poses. That's
Fact.
what I get from that.
Yeah.
And so we did have a lot of conversations about how do we want to present this, what's maybe the best way to market it and to show it. And so a lot of work did go into just trying to get a Kickstarter, because we like rushed to finish all those pages to show, and even
Mhm.
the 30-page preview, we were like, should we put that much out there? Like,
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe that's too much to show. And we're like, you know what? That's like 10% of the book. That's not a substantial amount. Like,
Yeah, and it's enough to hook you in and make you want more. Because I definitely was like, I need more of this.
yeah, I hope so. And you know, on my part, the decision to make this a 60-day campaign was conscious, because even motivating my friends and family who have been following this for a long time, people are busy. Like the social situation in America is constantly changing, so
Mhm.
it's a little bit like it's taken weeks for some of them to get around to like, yeah, I'm gonna support it. I'll do it. Yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah.
And so I also wanted the time to like ramp back up to be able to promote because it'd been a while since I'd done interviews or really talked about it. So I'm like, this is me exercising the muscle again and getting back,
And getting
and
back into
then
that zone.
hopefully like I'll be able to go out and even if I just have to go to Little Tokyo and LA, I'm gonna start handing out postcards. Just
Hey,
like check out my Kickstarter, guys. Need you to
that,
check out my
that-
Kickstarter.
hey man, that's dope. That's part of the marketing thing. That's part of that marketing grind. It's like, I got to get out here in these streets, and get out here and hand out stuff and all
Man,
this
I
stuff.
was talking about like, you know what? Maybe I'll go to Acon anyway with just like a bunch of business cards and postcards. Like, here you go, here you go.
If you go, because I know I'm going to be at Fan Expo as well on the 18th
Ah,
next month. The next month, I guess Father's Day weekend is what it is, and we're supposed to be there. The IPMOB crew is going to be there. We're doing a panel and everything like that. So
oh yeah,
we're doing the same grind. It's just like, man, all right, here we go.
yeah,
Hey guys, and it's like, man, you just hoping that what I'm saying, it would be easier and it would just come to you, but. Like you said
yeah,
earlier, that's not how it works. You got to
yeah.
get
It
out
is not
there.
if you build it, they will come. It's like if you build it, you got to get a giant billboard to tell people you built it.
Yeah. So, but um, now that we kind of like touched on everything, and I do remember you brought up your big gaming computer and everything like that. So, what are some games that Chris is playing?
Right now, Super Robot Wars 30 because
Okay.
big. I don't know if you can see this. Big Gundam fan.
Oh, okay, okay. I was about to say, you see, I got my Gurren Lagann.
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah. So I've been playing some Super Robot Wars,
okay.
which strategy RPGs are fun. Like I played Disgaea a lot back in the day,
Mm,
but mostly it's for the animations, man. Like you're like this 3 minute long animation of just like destroying this other robot. I was like, yeah, yeah, that's what
okay.
I needed today.
Fair enough, fair enough.
But I was also playing. I beat Elden Ring.
Beat it
Um,
already?
yeah, a while back. Yeah, like sometimes games. I have this problem where like I'll buy a game and I'll play it for like 2 hours. And I'm like, it's not that fun. It's
Mm-hmm.
not addictive level fun. Like it's not like I want to stay up late at night or skip work to play this game.
Mm-hmm.
But Elden Ring sort of hit that sort of feeling, and mostly because it was hard. Like I played Sekiro as well, and that one I liked for the setting, for the combat style, and because it was hard. But
Mm-hmm.
Elden Ring, it was just that thing of like, oh no, I'm gonna try 20 times to beat this guy. Like
Yeah.
I will finish this.
Mm-hmm.
And I I I went so hard on grinding and just exploring that I buffed up dexterity only almost, and I was like, using the moon veil, or even before that, I was just on the starter katana for a long, long time,
Mm-hmm.
and I just got to the point where I could one hit a lot of stuff because I just spent so much time just like wandering, exploring, clearing dungeons and stuff like that.
Okay.
So by the time I got to the end, I was like, oh, that wasn't that bad. It's
Yeah.
just
That's just how I'm the same way. If the game is challenging, the more harder it is, the more I'm going to play it, and that's kind of how I get addicted to a game. Just because I'm like, oh, they keep beating me, so now I got to get good. I got to keep going and get better.
yeah. And there are other types of games that I get hooked on too.
Mm,
It's just sort of hit or miss sometimes. Like I was playing the Yakuza series. Like I
mm,
started Yakuza 0, and I was like, this is an all right game. It's
mm,
you get to explore a part of Japan. And then I was like, all right, maybe I'll try the new Yakuza game that just like the brand new one. And
mhm,
that one feels more like a movie. And so I'm like watching it as I play it. And I'm like, yeah, this is interesting. This is addressing some social issues that you don't normally see.
mhm.
Um, but then I just got distracted with like, but Super Robot Wars. I could watch some Gundams and some old Japanese robots blow stuff up.
Mhm,
Uh, and the funny thing is, I'm on like fast forward for most of that game because I'm
mm,
like, the dialogue isn't voiced and it's all like oh no, this villain from this old series that I have never watched is like terrorizing the part of the world. Let's go stop him. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. Just put me on the battlefield already.
Yeah, that's pretty much like you said, man. Anything that's challenging and stuff like that, I go back to it. I go play it again. Cuphead, I play Cuphead like
Oh yeah,
over and over and over because I'm like, all right, I ain't played in like a year. Let me see, and then you don't have that rhythm anymore, so you suck again, and it's just like I got to get
yeah.
back to it.
The one for me that does that is Fury.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah. I
Mm,
beat that game a few different times. Now they're like, ooh, DLC for a new main character you can play as.
mm,
But I also like that one. I mean, for the music, for the story,
mm.
because it was slowly revealing, like, oh, you're this like cosmic terror that is the villain. Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, it's love. I love that, and I played Breath of the Wild on like
Oh yeah,
the
yeah,
hardest mode and things like just playing games like that and just going back to them because like once you get into a rhythm and you start to breeze through a game, but then if you put it down for like 6 months or something like that, you lost your rhythm and you're jumping back in. You're like, man, I don't remember this game being so hard, and then that's what I
yeah,
love to do, man. I love to play like games that were challenging and then get back to them. So I understand what you mean by the addicting part.
yeah. And it's hard sometimes because sometimes the story will grip me for the story because I want to see what happens, but it feels like I'm wasting money sometimes, but I'm glad Steam has a refund policy now because I'm like, I tried it for 2 hours. It's less than 2 weeks.
Mm,
I'm going to return it.
it's not for me.
It's not for me. It's fine. Like, it's very pretty. But like a game that I started and just never finished was like Horizon Zero Dawn. Like,
Yeah.
I'm probably 3/4 of the way through, and it is challenging.
Mm,
And I'm playing it on PC, so I'm like, I can just play it whenever. But I just, some reason it didn't like click with me.
yeah.
Where like Ghost of Tsushima, on the other hand, like I beat it. I played all the way through it. I played
Hmm.
on a harder difficulty and everything because
Hmm.
you know terrorizing Mongols is fun. It turns out.
Yeah.
Uh, but that
And
one is also like I have a bunch of Criterion Collection Blu-rays of like old samurai movies, and I practice Japanese swordsmanship. Like
mm, I
so,
see the
there's
swords.
a
I see the
deeper level of
swords.
appreciation. Oh yeah, those are
Mhm.
those are for use swords that I actually use for class and we do target cutting.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. So that's pretty like Ghost of Tsushima is dope. I'm like you. I have Horizon Zero Dawn, and I think I played about 6 hours worth of
Yeah.
playthrough. It just wasn't my cup of tea. Um, another game, Detroit Almost Human. I
Oh yeah.
love that one just because of the different scenarios where it's like, I failed to get that different, unlock this different tree or whatever of different scenarios, and I just keep going back. And between that one and Hitman, oh man, I got to
Oh
figure
man,
out how.
Hitman.
Yeah, how am I going to kill this dude this way? And I just,
And I don't think I have Hitman and maybe Hitman 2, and they're
mhm.
fun just for sandboxes, and I don't think I beat either of them, but I occasionally go back just for that, like I can do anything I want. I can just like beat people and like hide bodies.
Yeah.
It's actually really fun. Yeah.
Yeah, those are the games that I like really like to try to mess around with. And then like the smaller games, I don't know if you ever played We Happy Few, which was like a smaller game, but it's like a
It sounds
dystopian.
familiar, but I don't think I played it.
It's a dystopian type world or whatever, where
Yeah.
like they take these pills called joy to make them be
Uh,
happy, but it's really after like a big bomb. So like one dude, like when you don't take your joy, people can notice. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
That
yeah.
you're not on drugs. And he was like, he took his pill, but he ran out because he's poor, so he didn't have
Mm.
enough money to pay for him. And like they bust a pinata and they're all eating candy, and then the joy wore off. And then you see they're just eating rat guts, and it's like,
Ew.
yo, yeah, yeah, it's really it's a crazy game. Like
Man.
I love games like that too. So.
Yeah, for a while I was on a really big indie game kick just because like they're usually more contained storylines.
Mm.
I mean they're cheaper too, but and a lot of the AAA games feel like they have to justify their price and the time spent on them by like padding them out with 60 hours of content or side quest everywhere, and yeah, you just kind of get tired of the same like game mechanics over and over. So like I was playing like Enter the Gungeon was a lot of fun when that was out. Roguelite games I liked for a while, but I started to cool off on those a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, so we got some gaming conversation from you, trying to pick some more of your brain just to have some fun. But so I guess I'll just ask this and then we can kind of wrap up. Um, what are like some of your favorite? You mentioned mech, so I'm assuming mecha is like your baby, like your fave, or what's your favorite genre anime wise? And then whatever your favorite anime genre is, we can just ask what some of your favorite anime from that genre.
Yeah, Mecha is definitely way up there. And like yeah, that's just like I was building Gundam kits when I was like 14 and stuff when Gundam Wing was big in America.
Hmm.
Something about it really clicked. And but as I started to explore the genre more, like I went back and watched all the like Universal Century Gundam stuff, and it's a solid franchise. It is like the Star Trek of Japan.
Hmm.
There's a lot of good stuff in there. Um, but probably up there among the highest is like Gunbuster, because I really like sci-fi stories and I really like time dilation.
Hmm.
And that's a story that is about like time dilation, and it has giant robots, but honestly what I appreciate more is the sort of tragic story of someone going out into space and like time passing differently for other people on Earth and the dynamics of that. um so that's probably up there as like one of my top like mecha anime type things that I am like, it has some things that I wouldn't recommend for other people, but it's like, man, I love that story.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I gotta check that out. I know for me, I'm still freshly treading the line of mechas. I know some mechas, and then like I've missed out on a lot of them. Where like a lot of people that are mecha fans, they're like, "Oh, you need to watch this. You need to watch this. You need to watch
Yeah.
this."
Ava obviously is a big one, but that was, again, it wasn't good because of the giant robots. It was good because like psychological drama and story and all that stuff.
Fair enough.
Uh,
I'm gonna make sure to take that down. Mm.
but that turns out to be the case with most mecha stories, is that it's not the giant robots that make it good. It's the human story, or
Politics.
the fact that the robot is being used for military purposes.
Mm.
And so sort of in that vein, I'm like, yeah, I don't get down with the Transformers, because I'm like, sentient robots, nah.
Yeah. I like the politics and everything that comes with it. I know
Yeah,
we I don't know if this is like a legit argument and where you stand on this, but I've seen people have the argument that Attack on Titan is a meat robot. They're like, oh, these are
they're like
mechas, but
bio
it's a meat.
robots a little bit.
Yeah, and they're like,
Yeah,
so where do
there's a
you stand
blurry
on
line.
that? Because they just have some of the same characteristics as whereas politics, heavy politics, military aspects, and things like that.
Right.
So I didn't know where you necessarily stood on that, but I thought I'd have this conversation with you because I know like a lot of people do those comparisons, and I don't know if they're just doing it for devil's advocate or
Yeah.
if they actually mean it.
Yeah, I'll have to keep it short because I'm going to run out of power here. But
Oh,
yeah, I there's a strong argument for that, because the Titan sort of grows around them and they end up in the nape of the neck, but they are biological
hmm.
and they are basically brought about by almost magic. So it's sort of a weird, like, you can feel the influence of the mecha genre, like you can feel the influence of Gundam maybe a little bit in it,
Hmm.
but it's also then a hybrid that goes off in its own direction. And because like there's only one mecha show that I can think of that involved actual physical humans trying to fight robots with like hand weapons and stuff like that.
Hmm.
Everything else is about like we use giant robots to fight aliens, or we fight each other in giant robots. So I think
Hmm.
I can see the influence, but it's definitely not mecha. It doesn't count.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
It doesn't count.
Well, all right. So I know you said you're running low on power. Would you like to talk about anything, plug everything that you would like to plug before we get up out
Yeah.
of here?
Yeah, it's mostly, please check out the Rapture Burgers Kickstarter. We're an independent team of diverse folks, trying to make something very original. And we have rewards from physical versions, like a hardback copy too. We also have like a meeting with the team. One of our team members was the supervising art director on Multiverse of Madness and has some
Nice.
stories to tell. Let me tell you. Uh, but we also have little perks like shirts and hats. But for the most part, we just want people to look at us and support us and read our book when it comes out.
Okay. I'll make sure to plug all the Kickstarter information and everything like that into the show notes so everybody can know where to find it. I'll make sure to put your social media plugs as well in the show notes so when people are listening to this episode, they can click the links and make sure you guys support Chris's Kickstarter for Rapture Burgers because it's shaping out to be a really great story from what I saw in the preview. So I'm sure he's got more to tell. So you guys make sure you do that. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Chris, for pulling up and
Thank you.
doing this interview with us as well. And on that note, we will see you guys on the next one.